Friends, today's passage in Luke's Gospel is often held up as a passage that speaks to us of the importance of gratitude. And indeed, that is an important theme in the passage. But it's also a passage about foreigners. And the Gospel passage could easily be entitled The Thankful Foreigner. The story is simple and powerful. 10 men who are suffering from leprosy, a disease that made people outcasts from society, they call out to Jesus from a distance, asking for mercy. And Jesus tells them to go and show themselves to the priests, and as they go, they are healed. But only one of them, a Samaritan, a foreigner, someone despised and mistrusted by Jews, turns back to thank Jesus. And Jesus says, "Were not all cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner?" Now, this is very typical of Luke's Gospel. Luke again and again highlights not only Jesus' concern for the outsider, the foreigner, the socially despised, but also that foreigners and outsiders and the socially despised often display greater virtue, deeper faith, and more gratitude than those who consider themselves morally superior or closer to God by virtue of their heritage or their religion. Luke's Gospel is full of such examples. In chapter 4, Jesus reminds the people of Nazareth, his hometown, that Elijah was sent not to an Israelite widow, but to a widow of Zarephath in Sidon, a foreigner. And that Elisha healed not an Israelite leper, but Naaman the Syrian. And the people are so offended by Jesus referring to God's care for foreigners in their own scripture that they attempt to take his life. They want to throw him off a cliff. They're so offended. In chapter 7, it's a Roman centurion, a soldier of the occupying army, who shows extraordinary faith. And Jesus says, "I've not found such great faith in all Israel." In chapter 10, Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, again the foreigner, the outsider, as the one who truly loves his neighbor. In chapter 19, it is Zacchaeus, a tax collector and collaborator with the foreign Roman power, who is called a son of Abraham when he turns his life around. And even at the cross, it is the Roman centurion, again the foreigner, the outsider, who proclaims, "Surely this man was innocent," while others stand at a distance. And in our story today, again, it is only the foreigner who returns to express gratitude to Jesus. And each of these moments in Luke's Gospel, Luke overturns conventional expectations. Those who appear to be inside often fail to see and respond to God's grace, while those on the margins, the outsiders, the foreigners, the ones despised or feared, turn out to be the most open to God's transforming presence. Now, by the time of Jesus, the Jewish people had become increasingly insular and exclusive as a community, with a very strong ethnocentrism that drew very sharp distinctions between Jews and foreigners, insiders and outsiders. Faithfulness to God had become tightly linked with belonging to the nation, keeping its laws, preserving its traditions. And what had begun as a way of staying true to God's covenant gradually hardened into a sense of religious and national superiority. And it is into this world that Jesus steps. Not to condemn his own people, but to open their vision wider, to remind them that God's mercy is never limited to one nation, to one race, or even one religion. Luke's gospel invites the reader to question the very notion of who are or who are not the chosen people of God. It challenges nationalistic, ethnic, and religious boundaries that define who is in and who is out. Jesus' mission, as Luke presents it, is not to create a new tribe based on ethnicity, but to call into being a new kind of people, a community not bound by bloodline or border or badge, but by a shared faith, compassion, humility, and gratitude. And this new community, according to Luke's gospel, is marked by what we might call the deeper values of God: mercy over judgment, compassion over exclusion, humility over pride, gratitude over entitlement, and a love that crosses all human-made boundaries. It is a community that sees every person as a bearer of God's image. What does all of this have to say to us in our time? A time when anger and fear about foreigners, immigration, borders, and outsiders have come to dominate our public conversation and our political debates. From a personal perspective, the nature of the current national debate on immigration, as important as it is, does raise some concerns for me. There is clearly a problem with the issue of uncontrolled small boat crossings over the English Channel. But asylum seekers in the UK, interestingly, only make up about 4 to 5% of the immigrant population of the UK. So it's a relatively small portion of the total number of immigrants. But that thorny and difficult issue, and it is a difficult, thorny issue of asylum seekers and small boat crossings, has become projected onto the other 90 to 95% of immigrants who are here legally, on a legal visa, and thus casting a deep and dark shadow over them, creating the impression that the majority of immigrants in the UK are here either illegally or freeloading off the state. Now, the Oxford-based Migration Observatory website shows that up until April of this year, a skilled worker immigrant with a partner would have been required to pay around £23,000 over a 7-year period to achieve settled status in the UK. And that includes visa fees and contributions to the NHS. With a family of 2 children, that would have gone up to almost £50,000 over the same period. And with recent changes by the Labour government, that period is going to be extended to over 10, probably 11 years in the end to achieve settled status, with that cost for skilled workers rising considerably. And those costs are over and above normal tax payments every year and normal national insurance contributions, which immigrants still have to pay over and above those other major contributions. And so rather than being a liability on the state, even taking into account refugees and illegal immigrants, a recent study suggests that the 90% to maybe 95% of immigrants on visas contribute more financially to the UK economy than the average UK citizen. And on an annual basis, they on average contribute at least £2,000 more than the average UK citizen. Now, contrary to the misleading, I think I'm just concerned that in the debate, those figures are hardly ever shared. Contrary to the misleading announcement by Boris Johnson when he was still Prime Minister that he was introducing an Australian-style points-based visa system in the UK, this strict and arduous process, which Wendy and I had to go through, we know how difficult it is. It was already in place in 2008 and tightened up considerably in 2012 by Theresa May when she was in charge of the Home Office. All that Boris Johnson's government did was, after Brexit, to extend an existing system to EU citizens. It was already there. Most people don't know that. I think most people think it's been a free-for-all up until now. And there have been other worrying, misleading aspects in the current debate. In June of this year, there was a sensationalist headline that created the impression that a large percentage of immigrants in the UK are criminals. But for anyone who dug a little deeper, did a bit more research, it is evident that the headline was in fact misleading. You will probably remember the headline. It stated that 12 to 13% of the prison population in England and Wales were made up of foreign-born individuals. It was a headline that stirred up a lot of anger and negative feelings. But what those articles didn't say was that according to the last census, the percentage of foreign-born people living in the UK is actually around 16%, meaning that foreign-born people are actually underrepresented in the prison population. Now, isn't that interesting? And there are other reasons. I can't go into all, but there are other reasons why that 12 to 13% is as high as it is, which seems to inflate that figure. But with all the facts available, what it actually suggests is the very opposite of what people thought when they first saw that headline. That in fact, UK-born people are more likely to be criminals than foreign-born residents coming in from the UK. It doesn't mean that there aren't immigrants who are criminals. Of course there are. But in fact, those statistics show that the very opposite is true. UK-born residents, citizens, are more likely to be criminals than immigrants, according to those statistics. Lastly, a few weeks ago, the Labour government announced that immigrants were no longer going to be able to claim public benefits. It was a really nice soundbite for a government wanting to be seen to be doing something. But the truth is, immigrants on visas, which again make up 90 to 95% of immigrants in the country at the moment, they haven't been able to claim public benefits for around 25 years. Now, that would exclude EU citizens while the UK was still part of the EU. But for anyone outside of the EU, immigrants haven't been able to claim public benefits for over 25 years. And that isn't expressed in the public debate. I'm not saying that there is no debate to be had. Of course there is. The issue of immigration includes tricky issues around integration and social cohesion. There's also a really important issue to be solved around small boat crossings that is dominating the debate and casting shadows on everything else. But the nature of the current debate, I worry, is distorting the facts, and that the vast majority of immigrants who are here legally on visas are making a large and a positive contribution not only to the UK's health system, which wouldn't operate if it wasn't for doctors and nurses coming from overseas, but also making a large and positive contribution to the economy. Getting back to our passage from Luke, perhaps Luke's gospel speaks a gentle but firm word to us. Be careful. Be careful who you call a foreigner, or too quickly label the foreigner as bad and as the source of all our problems. Because, according to Luke's gospel, in God's story, it's often the foreigner, the outsider, the unexpected one, who shows us what true faith can look like, who reminds us what gratitude can sound like, and who helps us to rediscover what love really means. And again, I really want to say I don't want to diminish the complexity around a rapidly growing immigrant population. There are real issues that need to be wrestled with. But I think all the facts need to be brought into that and not having it distorted by partial facts. But in the end, we might, in this community, have different views on these things and come to those conclusions from different places. But in the end, whatever our views are on that debate around immigration and foreigners, as Christians, we surely can't simply ignore what the witness of Jesus might have to say on these matters. In the end, we might still come to different conclusions, and that's okay. But as people of faith, what we can't do is ignore Jesus. And so the question for each of us, wherever we are coming to this debate from, remains, how does Jesus inform my perspective or your perspective on this debate? So I'm not trying to say what you should believe. I'm just raising some concerns that I've seen. This is some food for thought, as always. I pray that, like Jesus, I'm not going to be led to the cliff at the edge of the town and thrown off. This is just some food for thought. All of us need to wrestle with these questions because they are important questions to be wrestling with. Amen. We invite